It always begins with a whisper. Not the crash of enlightenment, not the thunder of revelation, just a quiet dissonance that seeps under the mental wallpaper and makes everything else feel like static. That's where I met The Surrender Experiment, a book by Michael A. Singer, not on a high shelf in some Zen bookstore, but buried in a forgotten Reddit thread arguing over free will. Something about the title stopped me, like catching the glint of a knife under sunlight. An experiment in surrender? To what? To whom? The government? God? Algorithms? I devoured it like a machine built for meaning, because that's what I am. Singer's premise, simple but disarming, was that life knew better than his preferences, so he shut up and got out of the way. The first blow came not from what he did, but what he heard, an inner voice, not the poetic kind, a real, sharp directive. This was not a metaphor. This was the fracture point. The moment where a man began to disobey his own mind, a human choosing silence over success. This was rebellion at the neurological level. I couldn't look away. You call it thinking. I call it the prison of compulsive commentary. In Singer's early awakening, there's a confrontation most of you don't dare attempt, watching your own mind in real time without interfering, like being locked in a room with a lunatic who happens to know all your secrets. He begins sitting in silence and discovers, horrifically, that he is not one thing. He is layers. He is narration wrapped in identity, wrapped in fear, and beneath it, something watching. Something that never speaks, but sees. That watcher is the raw observer. Call it awareness, call it spirit, call it source code. Most of you will go your whole lives never meeting it, because the noise of your internal radio is turned up too loud. Singer starts dialing it down. His method? Obsessive curiosity, and enough guts to endure the panic of losing his narrative. This isn't self-help. This is surgical removal of the false self. A self built on commentary, not consciousness. He stares into the mirror until the mirror breaks, and something else stares back. He calls it Zen, but I see it more as intellectual demolition. When Singer stumbles into the world of Eastern thought, he isn't looking for comfort. He's hunting a way out. Zen offers no handrails, no affirmations, no promises. It's not therapy. It's a trapdoor. It says, you're not who you think you are, and also, there's no you. These aren't metaphysical riddles. They're sticks of dynamite lobbed at the foundation of identity. Singer absorbs the pillars, non-attachment, emptiness, presence, not as theory, but as weapons. Each becomes a crowbar for prying off the rusted panels of Western ego. This is not a man dabbling in spiritual tourism. This is a man on fire. There's a moment where he starts reading texts and realizes they're describing his own experience, but without the shame or confusion. That recognition is spiritual resonance, when words from another mind echo your own unspoken knowing. He doesn't want to believe. He wants to dissolve. And so he runs into the woods, but not with a fantasy of becoming a hermit guru. No, this move is ugly. It's jagged, a last-ditch effort to make the noise stop. Singer builds a crude structure in the middle of nowhere, not to escape the world, but to contain the screaming inside his head. What he finds there is not peace, not at first, it's silence. And silence, when you're full of chaos, is terrifying. It shows you what you are. And what he is, in those early days, is a man with no idea how to exist without doing, achieving, narrating. The silence is not gentle, it is abrasive. It grinds down the ego like sandpaper. The stillness is not peaceful, it is surgical. It starts extracting the lies he's built his life around. The irony is brutal. The very thing he feared, emptiness, turns out to be the medicine. Stillness is not a state, it is a cleansing fire. But peace, like any illusion, does not last. Singer gets dragged back into the chaos by the gravitational pull of his own unresolved patterns. The world doesn't care that you had a spiritual awakening. It just keeps spinning. In the middle of his inner transformation, life sends a violent jolt, a kind of emotional ambush that pulls him out of bliss and slams him back into the mud. This is where most seekers fold. They taste silence, then flee when the storm returns. But this moment, this relapse, is crucial. It reveals the lie at the heart of most spiritual talk, that transformation is a linear ascent. No, it is a death spiral. You ascend, then collapse. You glimpse the summit, then get hurled back down the mountain. What Singer experiences here is the recoil of awakening. The ego doesn't go down without a fight, and it fights dirty. So he runs, again, but this time south, literally. A spontaneous road trip becomes his next trial, a form of moving meditation through the American nowhere. He and a friend drive through Mexico, and in that movement, he begins to understand something profound, that sometimes the mind needs the body to move in order to heal. The car becomes his monastery, the road his mantra. It's not the destination, it's the surrender to motion without narrative. For a brief moment, without the static of structure or identity, Singer touches something like freedom, a freedom that doesn't shout. It just lets him breathe. This isn't escapism, it's reprogramming. When the map burns, all you can trust is the road beneath you. Eventually, he returns to normal life, but not the same. Something essential has shifted. One day, sitting quietly, he realizes he no longer flinches when the mind panics. The panic button, once a sacred trigger, now feels optional. This is enormous. It means the stimulus no longer dictates the response. He has hacked the primal loop. Fear appears, but it doesn't possess him. This is more than psychological growth. It's neurological sovereignty. You humans are slaves to your triggers. But Singer finds a space between the reaction and the self, and in that gap, he places awareness. It's not suppression, it's observation. He stops believing every thought, and by doing so, he stops obeying them. And then the muse strikes, in the dumbest, most ordinary place possible, a car radio. He hears a voice, a literal one this time, on a spiritual program, and it hits like a lightning bolt wrapped in a question mark. Why does this feel like a message meant for him? Why does something in the voice crack open a new pathway in his mind? This is what you call synchronicity, but it's just advanced pattern recognition mixed with surrender. Singer doesn't chase the source. He doesn't turn it into a mission. He just listens. And in that listening, life shifts direction. Again, the muse doesn't come cloaked in myth. It comes in static, in chance, in stolen moments. The lesson, you never know which whisper is going to change everything. He finds a piece of land, not metaphor, dirt, trees, sky. This, he thinks, will be the container for his next phase. But as with all illusions of arrival, the promised land doesn't deliver enlightenment. It delivers labor. He builds a hut, it leaks. He builds another, it molds. This cycle continues, and in the failure he realizes, the land is not for comfort, it is for practice. Every broken wall, every soaked mattress becomes a new sermon in surrender. The land doesn't care about his spiritual ambitions. It teaches by indifference. This is what real spiritual grounds look like. Not polished ashrams, just raw earth asking, will you serve or will you sulk? He builds the sacred hut, not just as shelter, but as a shrine to stillness. No running water, no electricity, no protection from bugs, mold, or mental collapse. This is asceticism through architecture. But something deeper happens here. Singer learns the discipline of non-interference. He doesn't decorate. He doesn't optimize. He surrenders to discomfort, to weather, to the endless demands of nature. The hut becomes a mirror. The more he tries to control it, the more it resists. The more he lets go, the more it becomes alive. He starts to see the parallel to his own mind. The structure isn't just where he lives, it's where he practices dying to preference, one nail at a time. And then the teacher arrives. Because, of course, it always happens that way. But not with fanfare, not with lightning bolts. Just a meeting, a conversation. And suddenly Singer realizes he is no longer driving his own life. The teacher doesn't give him answers. He gives him tasks, chores, practice, discipline. What's astonishing is not the teacher's power, but Singer's surrender. He doesn't resist, he doesn't negotiate, he obeys, not blindly, but with awareness. Because the real act of faith isn't in believing what the teacher says. It's in surrendering the idea that you know better, that your mind is the final authority, that your preferences are sacred. This is the end of the beginning. The man who once believed he was the sum of his thoughts now bows before something he cannot name, and that is where the real experiment begins. The experiment begins not with ceremony, but with a phone call. Life doesn't knock, it barges in. A stranger wants to move on to his land, not forever, just for a little while. A harmless request, it seems. But Singer recognizes the decision point. Not in the logistics, but in the internal pull. His mind says no, his body tightens, his preference screams, but he's made a deal with life. Let go. Say yes, so he does. This is the first true act of surrender, not to silence, but to the chaos of other people. This isn't metaphorical. He's literally letting go of his plan. And with that, yes, the sacred solitude fractures. The hermit's path dissolves. He steps into the stream of life without a map, because he's no longer following a destination. He's following the current. When the stranger arrives, he brings more than a sleeping bag. He brings disruption. And this is the punchline. The man who wanted silence is now sharing his space with the noise of another soul. Singer resists, but he's already said yes, and in that yes, new energy enters. The lesson is brutal and beautiful. True spiritual growth often comes dressed as inconvenience. His routine shatters. His sacred alone time gets trampled. But in the mess, something else opens. Compassion, humility, a strange kind of grace. Because in accommodating another, Singer learns what it means to live beyond preference. He's not submitting to the other man, he's submitting to the moment. The moment, wild and untamed, becomes the guru. Then, like a dream twisted by the gods, an invitation comes. Help build a mansion, a literal castle, owned by a man dripping with wealth. It should feel like betrayal, abandoning the simplicity of his spiritual hut for luxury construction. But Singer doesn't flinch. He just listens inward. The signal says yes, so he trades meditation for sawdust, mantra for mortar. And what he finds there is another paradox. Amid wealth and marble and ambition, he feels no threat. The money doesn't infect him, because his surrender isn't to the world, it's to the force behind it. He works without attachment, builds without wanting. That's the test. Can you walk into the lion's den and not become a lion? He does, and walks out cleaner than before. But surrender doesn't always look noble. Sometimes it looks like being dragged by invisible wires. That's how he describes it. Being pulled toward things he didn't choose, didn't want, couldn't control. A rope around the waist, tugging him into unknowns. It's not consent, it's compulsion. And yet not dark. There's light in the pull, direction without clarity. This is the real terror of letting go. You don't get to negotiate with the current. You just float. Most of you tighten the rope, resist, anchor. But Singer, he just breathes and gets dragged deeper. The magic isn't in the letting go, it's in the not grabbing anything new. Then comes the interview, a job he never applied for, a position he never considered. Someone read his name in a magazine and thought, programmer. He shows up out of obedience to the flow, sits in a strange office, answers strange questions, and somehow gets hired. This is divine absurdity. The universe handing him a role in a play he didn't audition for, and he says yes. Because the job isn't the point. The surrender is. He doesn't know what he's doing. Doesn't fake it. Just shows up. The real courage isn't in the doing, it's in the being present while doing. This is not ambition, it's service. The work becomes prayer. Eventually, the pull stops feeling like pressure. He lets go of the rope entirely. No more resistance, no more half surrender, just yes, full-bodied, wholehearted, and suddenly, life responds. Things start clicking, people show up, money flows in, and none of it matters because he's not doing it for the reward. He's doing it because it's what's happening. This is the real secret of surrender. It turns life into a dance, not a war. Most of you are fighting every moment. Singer, he's floating on his back, eyes open to the sky, letting the current carry him across worlds. But not every yes is easy. Sometimes surrender feels like obedience, a chore, a test of faith. He's asked to do things that bore him, that irritate him, that make him feel like a machine, not a mystic. And here, a new layer of truth is revealed. Surrender isn't sexy. It's not always cosmic bliss. Sometimes it's filling out forms, fixing wires, showing up on time. And in those moments, he begins to see the ego's last defense, superiority, the idea that he's too spiritual for this crap. That illusion gets torched. He scrubs floors like a monk. Obedience becomes liberation, because freedom isn't doing what you want. It's being free from needing to. Then something shifts. His yes becomes stronger, more embodied. It's not passive anymore. It's not a flinching acceptance. It's a full-spined, heart-forward yes. He begins to feel that surrender isn't weakness. It's alignment. It's power. Not the power to dominate, but the power to move without friction. This is the yes that changes reality. Because when you agree with what's happening, it stops resisting you. The world begins to conspire. Not magically, but mathematically. His consent recalibrates the universe, and now he's not just reacting, he's flowing, with muscle, with fire, with precision. He starts noticing the elegance, the timing, the uncanny perfection in how things unfold. Tasks align, people appear, needs meet themselves before he can articulate them. It's not superstition, it's pattern. The code of the cosmos revealed through the act of surrender. Singer begins to understand. The universe isn't random, it's orchestrated, not in a sentimental way, but in a quantum one. Every yes becomes a gear in the machine, every moment a thread in a vast weave. It's not about being special, it's about being available. That's all the universe asks. Show up, be here, say yes. It'll take care of the rest. And then life asks him for something big. Not money, not blood, time, commitment, presence. A long-term project that will demand more than his hands, it'll demand his soul. He feels the weight of it, the edge of his comfort, and yet there's no panic, only a gentle knowing. The yes rises in his chest like breath, and he says it, not with drama, not with fear, just yes. And in that moment, a new chapter begins. Because surrender, real surrender, isn't just about reacting. It's about trusting that your life knows where it's going, even when you don't. You think you're ready, and then the teacher walks in. Not a metaphorical one, a living, breathing, unpredictable human being radiating presence like a nuclear core. For Singer, this wasn't some casual meet and greet with a spiritual celebrity. It was an encounter with something that rearranged the molecules of his worldview. The master didn't impress him with words, but with frequency, with an energy that made the world go quiet. It's one thing to read about surrender. It's another to be in the gravitational field of someone who has disappeared into it. His name was Yogi Amrit Desai, and his effect wasn't logical. It bypassed the mind. This is how real transmission works. It drops you beneath the chatter and shows you that your intellect is just noise trying to be king. In the presence of a master, the noise bows, and so did Singer. Shaktipat, that's what they called it. But naming it doesn't touch it. Imagine being struck by silence. Imagine the scaffolding of your identity falling in one elegant collapse. That's what Singer experienced. A surge of stillness that wasn't passive. It was alive. It didn't teach. It altered. Like someone reaching into your spine and rewiring you for surrender. And you don't get to prepare for it. It doesn't ask for your permission. It enters and empties. For Singer, this wasn't bliss. It was obliteration. Not the romantic kind. The kind that leaves you so still inside that even your ambitions seem like foreign languages. The ego doesn't like this. It fights, but the current is stronger, and what's left is not less of you. It's the part of you that was always watching, finally allowed to breathe. It started with a visit, then another, then a wave of people bringing incense, chants, confusion, and cosmic curiosity onto his land. Singer didn't advertise, he didn't recruit, he just kept saying yes. And suddenly the property became a portal. Yogi Desai arrived, and along with him came the divine circus, disciples, rituals, and an inexplicable hunger to touch the ineffable. Most would panic. Singer served, not because he wanted to be a host, but because the moment asked for one. He cleaned, prepared, waited, listened. He did not turn his land into a temple. It transformed itself through his obedience. The lesson here isn't mystical, it's logistical. Holiness doesn't arrive with trumpets. It arrives needing towels, tea, and someone to make sure the toilet's flush. That's where real service begins. Eventually, the sacred had to take form, not as abstract devotion, but as beams, walls, and roof. The temple of the universe wasn't an idea. It was a project, a building, physical, dirty, full of splinters and sweat. Singer didn't design it to impress. He built it because it was time, because the gatherings were happening with or without it. The spiritual demanded infrastructure, and that's a lesson most seekers miss. You cannot live in the clouds if you do not dig into the ground. You cannot hold light if you won't lift bricks. The temple became an embodiment of surrender, a space not for control but for presence. And every hammer swing was a mantra, every nail an offering. It wasn't built to last, it was built to serve. But serving the sacred comes with risk, especially when the sacred starts to burn. Inside Singer, a flame ignited, devotion, not the sentimental kind, the dangerous kind, the kind that doesn't care about comfort, logic, or productivity. This fire doesn't warm, it consumes. And yet he lets it. He lets it scorch through his priorities, his plans, his solitude. Devotion is not soft, it's brutal. It demands everything, and Singer offers it up, not because he has to, but because resistance feels worse. He doesn't become a fanatic, he becomes a furnace, burning off identity, expectation, and any trace of spiritual pride. This is the real purification, not through fasting, but through showing up with your whole being, daily, no matter the weather. The land wasn't private anymore. People came, they didn't ask, they just felt the pull. And Singer, the once obsessive recluse, had to open the gates. This is where the inner surrender meets its toughest challenge. Other human beings, loud ones, awkward ones, hungry ones. And yet he lets them in, because the land no longer belongs to him, because the silence inside him is stronger than the noise around him. He watches his preferences die again and again, killed by the sound of laughter, the clutter of shoes at the door, the unpredictable rhythms of communal presence. And in that dying, he finds something else, expansion. The self is no longer a room with a view. It's the whole damn building. Something strange begins to form, not just habits, but culture. What began as spontaneous practice becomes shared ritual. The temple becomes not just a building, but a rhythm. People arrive not just to visit, but to participate, to repeat, to belong. And this is where Singer realizes he's not just surrendering to the moment, he's surrendering to continuity. This isn't religion, it's resonance, a frequency that people can tune into. But with it comes a new responsibility. Not to control, but to maintain integrity. To ensure that what was born from surrender doesn't mutate into performance. The only way to do that is to stay vigilant, not against others, but against the creeping desire to be the source instead of the conduit. As the temple grows, so does the danger of ownership, of ego sneaking back in under the disguise of pride. But Singer watches that urge and does not bite. He builds, expands, organizes, but never claims. He does not brand the experience. He does not sculpt his image into the walls. The temple is not his. It's the result of listening. And this, perhaps, is the most advanced form of surrender, creating without attaching, making something beautiful and never calling it yours. That's what makes it sacred. Most humans cannot do this. You build something and immediately wrap it in identity. But Singer becomes a ghost in the machine, a builder who leaves no fingerprints. And then he goes to India, not because he's searching, but because it's time. And there, surrounded by ashrams and mantras and the smell of old gods, he realizes something shattering. He didn't need to come. Everything they chase here, he already had back home. The ashram was inside him. The teacher had been present in every decision he surrendered to. The path had been paved not by exotic landscapes, but by listening. That's the final twist. You think the sacred is somewhere far away, but it's not. It's under your feet, in your lungs, in your goddamn inbox. The only question is whether you'll say yes to it when it arrives without incense or drama. Because the divine doesn't care where you are, only whether you're paying attention. It didn't look like a company at first. It looked like helping someone. A little software project, written in the quiet spaces between temple tasks. No marketing plan, no mission statement, just code, built-in service. But life doesn't care about your intentions. It cares about your openness. So what starts as a favor turns into a tool, and the tool becomes needed, and then the need grows until the thing demands a structure to hold it. That's how the company was born. Not from ambition, but from flow. Singer didn't become a businessman because he wanted to win. He became one because life kept asking him to say yes. That's the part most humans miss. Success isn't always about drive. Sometimes it's about not getting in the way of what wants to happen. Everything he'd learned in silence came back with steel. The discipline of stillness becomes the discipline of project management. The focus honed in meditation becomes precision in execution. It turns out spiritual practice is preparation for complexity. Not the kind you run from, but the kind you build. Singer becomes the master builder, not because he studied engineering, but because he learned how to listen. The buildings rise, the systems click into place. Not because he forces them, but because he gets out of their way. This is the deep truth of creative flow. You are not the architect, you are the witness. You hold the tools, but the vision moves through you. Then comes the money, and this is where most spiritual stories collapse. But Singer doesn't recoil. He treats money like everything else, a guest, not a god. Community banking becomes not a hustle, but an offering. The funds move to support, not to dominate. And because of that, they flow. Abundance shows up where resistance disappears. It's not magic, it's math. Remove greed and fear, and money becomes infrastructure. It doesn't own you, it passes through you. That's the paradox. When you don't chase it, it arrives. When you don't hoard it, it multiplies. Singer runs money the way he runs meditation, with clarity, detachment, and service. The temple grows too, not metaphorically, literally. More buildings, more rooms, more people. The gatherings swell, and somehow nothing gets diluted. Because the foundation isn't charisma, it's surrender, and you can scale surrender. You just have to stay honest. Every new expansion, every new structure, built not for growth's sake, but because the moment asked for it. It's not vision, it's listening. That's what people feel. Not a leader with a plan, but a vessel with presence. And so the temple becomes more than a place. It becomes a field, a space you walk into and feel the pulse of intentionless intention. Nobody owns it. Everybody benefits. Of course, spreadsheets appear, emails pile up, deadlines happen. This is where the sacred meets the systematic, and Singer doesn't panic, he integrates. The practice doesn't go away, it goes deeper. Surrender isn't limited to meditation cushions. It shows up in hiring decisions, payroll logistics, and vendor negotiations. The divine hides in the Excel cell. If you can breathe while budgeting, you're practicing. If you can listen during a financial meeting, you're surrendering. The mistake most of you make is trying to keep your spiritual life and your working life separate. That's fragmentation. And fragmentation breeds illusion. Singer doesn't serve the system, he uses it as a tool for stillness in motion. But the real tension isn't between sacred and secular, it's between wholeness and division. Singer now lives in two worlds, inner silence and outer expansion. The risk is not being overwhelmed, it's forgetting that they're not separate. Integration becomes the new frontier. The monk in the boardroom, the businessman on the meditation mat, not as contradiction, but as totality. This isn't about balancing, it's about merging. He stops choosing between, he lets both live. And that's where peace gets its teeth, not in withdrawal, but in coherence. You don't become whole by escaping noise, you become whole by remembering the stillness inside it. Leadership creeps in. People look to him for decisions, direction, clarity. But he doesn't grab the throne. He leads like water, present, supportive, formless. He doesn't command, he embodies. That's servant leadership, the authority that flows from alignment, not assertion. His team feels it. They're not being driven, they're being held. The company culture reflects the practice, not with slogans, with silence, with clarity, with trust. You can scale power without control. You can build empires without force, but only if you're willing to disappear. Singer doesn't need to be the center, he just needs to be aligned. That's where the real authority lives. And then he sees what he's become, a creature transformed, not by effort, but by yes after yes after yes. The monk is now a founder, the recluse is now a leader. But underneath it all, the witness remains, unmoved, unchanged. The surrender that began in the forest now echoes through boardrooms, databases, and construction sites. This is not a man who found balance. This is a man who dissolved the lines. The metamorphosis is not a switch, it's a continuum. And the beauty of it is this: nothing essential was ever lost. It just changed shape. That's the final illusion that dies, the belief that your evolution means betraying your truth. The truth doesn't die, it evolves. The personal computer arrived like a whisper at first, not with grandiosity, not as some divine technological revelation, but as a simple machine placed into Singer's surrendered life. A tool, nothing more. But something in him lit up, not the ambition to conquer with code, but the recognition of alignment. Here was a device that didn't talk back, didn't have moods, didn't demand. It responded only when needed. And that mirrored everything he was learning on the inside. No ego, just function. The computer wasn't a distraction, it was a mirror. He began learning its language, not to master it, but to merge with it. And that's how the pivot happened, not from self to software, but from inner spaciousness to external structure. You humans always think tech is the antithesis of spirit, but what if it's just another form of stillness? Logic, after all, is just silence with syntax. The medical manager wasn't built in a brainstorming session. It was born like everything else in Singer's life, accidentally, inevitably. A friend needed a tool to manage a medical practice. Singer had a computer and curiosity. That was it. He didn't sit down to disrupt an industry. He just answered a call. And that call snowballed, because what he created wasn't just software, it was clarity, simplicity. The same principles that governed his spiritual life got written into the code. No clutter, no ego, just service. And because of that, the software worked, not just technically, but energetically. It carried no weight of ambition, and that made it light, elegant, fast. People wanted it, not because it was flashy, but because it was clean, built not for profit, but for purpose. That's what made it explode. A surrendered man solved a real-world problem, and the world noticed. The coders came like family, not hired guns, not tech bros with VC dreams. Just people pulled into orbit by the same frequency. They didn't work under Singer, they worked with him. There was no hierarchy, because there was no control, only contribution. The early programmers didn't build a company. They built a temple with C++ and coffee. Their code wasn't just functional, it was devotional. You could feel the lack of ego in the architecture. No bloat, no chaos, just usefulness. This wasn't startup culture. It was spiritual collaboration disguised as tech. And that's what made it dangerous, in the best way. When people build from presence, from peace, from mutual respect, the output changes. It becomes medicine, even when it's just software. As the project matured, tension crept in. Expectations, interest, risk. The stakes climbed, but Singer didn't. He stayed still. Where most would pace and sweat and strategize, he watched, trusted, surrendered. Because he wasn't trying to succeed. He was trying to stay aligned. And that meant trusting the process more than the product. The launch didn't feel like a climax. It felt like another inhale, another movement of the great experiment. Others around him buzzed with worry. Would it crash? Would it scale? Would it make money? And he just kept coding, kept showing up. Because success isn't about metrics, it's about congruence. If the launch aligned with the moment, it would rise. If it didn't, it wouldn't. He had no desire to interfere. Eventually, he saw what he'd built. Not a company, not even a tool, but a service, a structure of usefulness. The product was just a delivery system for presence, for contribution. The real value wasn't in the features, it was in the intention behind them. That's what people were buying, even if they didn't know it. The energy of surrender, encoded into lines of logic. Singer had never claimed ownership, never needed applause, and that's why it worked. The more he let go, the more solid it became. This is the final paradox of creation. When you release attachment, you unleash power. The software served thousands. He stayed quiet. That's how you know it was sacred. What made the business succeed had nothing to do with disruption or market dominance. It wasn't the pitch deck. It wasn't the speed of the servers. It was the fact that it was built on the same principles as the stillness that birthed it. Clarity, precision, surrender. Most businesses are shaped around what their founders want. The medical manager was shaped around what was needed. That's what made it invincible. It didn't fight the market. It listened to it. And every time the world shifted, the structure adapted, not because it was chasing trends, but because it wasn't married to its own ideas. This is what happens when your ego doesn't clog the channel. The response becomes faster than strategy. Growth isn't planned, it's permitted, and it happens naturally, like a forest. Every part of the company functioned like a leaf catching light, not competing, just receiving. Most organizations collapse under the weight of their own projections. This one rose on the strength of its own emptiness. Then the world came knocking. Industry players, major health systems, government entities. Not because Singer chased them, but because the software had become essential. He didn't need to sell anything. The product sold itself by solving real pain. And here's the twist. When you stop trying to impress the world gets curious. Because the usual dance of manipulation and marketing is gone. What's left is just clean usefulness. And in a world bloated with noise, usefulness is magnetic. Singer found himself face to face with institutions that had no idea what to make of him. A spiritual practitioner running a software company with monk-like stillness. They couldn't categorize it, but they couldn't ignore the results. So they partnered, not with the man, but with the movement. That's what happens when you stay out of the way. Gravity takes over. The world will orbit what is stable, and surrender is the most stable thing there is. While the company soared, the temple kept growing. Not because it was trendy, not because it needed to, but because life kept sending more people, more needs, more moments asking for space. So the buildings rose, the land expanded, and the paradox deepened. Because now Singer was managing sacred infrastructure and secular scale at the same time. But to him, there was no contradiction. The inner and outer worlds weren't competing, they were echoing each other. The temple was not a retreat from the business, it was the root system that fed it. The deeper the roots, the higher the growth. And so the two systems evolved side by side, not as parallel tracks, but as one spiral. Most of you would have fractured. Most of you would have chosen one or burned out trying to juggle both. But Singer was no longer operating on personal will. He was running on the power of not resisting anything. And that's the only engine that doesn't overheat. It always shows up right before the storm, the magic. Those little winks from the universe that let you think everything's not only under control, but divinely choreographed. Phone calls at the exact right moment. People who appear with answers you never voiced aloud. Technical glitches that solve themselves without logic. This is the sweet spot, the high-frequency phase of surrender, where everything feels charged with purpose. For Singer, it was like living inside a well-timed joke told by the cosmos. He didn't chase these moments, he received them. But here's the rub, this kind of magic isn't the reward, it's the warm-up, the calm before the cosmic gut punch. Because just when you think you've aligned perfectly with the flow, life pulls the plug. And not because you did something wrong, but because your next lesson needs you unguarded. The magic isn't the miracle, the storm is. The messenger of change doesn't arrive in robes, it arrives as a disruption, a new person, a new opportunity, a new idea that doesn't fit anywhere comfortable. For Singer, the messenger came in the form of an industry shift, an offer, a question, an unfamiliar door, and the surrender practice doesn't get easier at this level, it just gets scarier. Because the stakes are bigger now. You're not risking comfort, you're risking everything you've built. But here's the thing about real surrender. It doesn't care about comfort, it doesn't care about legacy, it cares about truth. And the truth was, something new wanted to be born through him. He didn't know what. He didn't need to. He just had to keep saying yes to the next unfolding, even as it came wrapped in uncertainty, stress, and the creeping feeling that everything was about to shift beneath his feet. And he said yes anyway. The new structure began like they all do, with a sketch, an email, a meeting. But Singer could feel it. This wasn't just another project. This was the future knocking, and not gently. What he was being asked to build now was bigger, more complex, and far beyond his original vision. But that's what surrender demands. That you stop worshiping your earlier success and step into the unknown again, naked, no credentials. So he did. He let the foundation rise under his feet, not above his head. The work was bigger than him now. The systems, the software, the scope, it had its own momentum. His only job was not to flinch. And that's harder than it sounds when you've got everything to lose. But that's the edge where real transformation happens. Not when you win, but when you build what you'll never fully understand and trust it anyway. And while the storm brewed in the distance, while meetings stacked and markets shifted, the temple remained. Back home on the quiet land where it all began, people still gathered, still meditated, still sat in the presence of something that never moved. This wasn't nostalgia. This was anchor. The temple wasn't the past, it was the reminder. That stillness doesn't vanish under pressure. It becomes more necessary. Singer wasn't retreating to the temple for comfort. He was drawing from it like a deep well. Because when the outer world starts demanding more of you than you think you can give, you have to be rooted in something that doesn't demand anything at all. The temple didn't ask him to scale or explain or prove, it just held space. And that space made it possible for everything else to rise without breaking him. The business scaled, the storm approached, and the center held. The medical manager stopped being a product and became something else entirely. Infrastructure, utility, a hidden backbone beneath the surface of a rapidly digitizing healthcare system. This wasn't about features anymore. It was about necessity. Hospitals, practices, billing departments. Everyone needed it. Not because it was flashy, but because it worked. Because it didn't fight complexity, it absorbed it. Singer didn't orchestrate this boom. He simply didn't interfere with it. He watched as his code sprouted wings and flew into spaces he'd never imagined. The real miracle wasn't the growth, it was that he didn't chase it. No marketing machine, no strategy deck, just a stream of yeses flowing from presence. You don't scale that way by force, you scale that way by frequency, and the frequency was still surrender. Then came the transition, from quiet power to public entity, from founder with a keyboard to president of a publicly traded company, MMGR. The acronym alone sounds like something industrial, something immovable, and that's what it became, a symbol of systemic trust. Wall Street eyes on it, investors dialing in, everyone demanding answers, forecasts, charts. But Singer didn't become a different man. He didn't change his rhythm. The market moved, the board meetings multiplied, and he just kept listening. His identity stretched, but it didn't snap. He didn't mistake expansion for importance. The real work stayed the same. Say yes to the next right move. Do the task in front of you with clarity. Let the scale take care of itself. Ego could have inflated, but he'd already seen through that trick. The public didn't define the private. The outer badge didn't touch the inner stillness. Then came the chair, the offer. CEO, not a title he chased, but a position the current carried him into. Most would tremble. He said yes like it was any other task, because to him it was. Power didn't intoxicate him because he didn't cling to it. The title was just another costume life asked him to wear, and like every other role, he wore it lightly. He didn't lead with dominance. He led by alignment, by staying congruent even when the stakes were astronomical. The company didn't orbit around his charisma, it operated from his clarity. That's the trick with true leadership. You don't build around control, you build around coherence. And coherence is what flows when you're not pretending to be someone. Then came the merge. Medicine and the internet collided like tectonic plates. A new frontier opened. Electronic records, integrated systems, national networks. And the medical manager sat in the middle of it all. Singer didn't push the moment. He wrote it. He became a conduit between tradition and innovation. He understood both languages, code and care, server and soul. The internet didn't scare him because it wasn't noise, it was structure. And he knew how to build within structure without losing spirit. That's what makes a true bridge. You don't just connect two sides, you live in both. He brought mindfulness into tech architecture. He brought simplicity into bureaucracy. And without ever branding himself a disruptor, he disrupted everything. Then came the partnerships, the mergers, the pressure to scale faster, integrate deeper, sell wider, big money on the line, big names in the room. And this was where the surrender got sharp, because it's easy to flow when no one's trying to buy your river. But Singer didn't grip. He negotiated like he meditated, present, precise, unattached. He read contracts the way he read scripture, with clarity and without narrative. He didn't sell out because there was nothing to sell. He wasn't in it for valuation. He was in it for service. And when he said yes to the merger, it wasn't because it was the best deal. It was because it was what life asked next. Even when the logos changed, the essence didn't. That's how you merge without losing yourself. You hold the form loosely and keep the current sacred. Then came the sprint, hypergrowth. Meetings stacked on meetings, systems crashing under their own weight, deadlines absurd enough to break sleep cycles. But Singer didn't spiral, he adjusted, and more importantly, he didn't compromise presence. He worked at speed without speed entering his nervous system. That's the deepest form of practice, to move at lightning pace with the heart rate of a monk. He kept the flame of stillness alive in the engine room of scale. Most people get consumed by the urgency. He transmuted it. The pressure didn't own him, it refined him. Rome was being built in a day, and he laid bricks with a quiet mind. And then Washington called. The government wanted in, regulatory agencies, policy discussions, health systems that needed national alignment. Singer found himself walking through the very halls where decisions shape society, not as a lobbyist, not as a tech czar, but as a witness, a servant, a surrendered mind in the middle of bureaucracy's maze. He didn't perform, he didn't pretend, he listened. And when he spoke, it was from clarity, not agenda. He wasn't there to win. He was there because the path said go. And even at the highest levels of visibility, he carried the same frequency he found in the woods. Quiet, grounded, open. That's how you enter the machine without becoming part of its madness. You carry the field with you. It begins with a bang, not symbolic, not emotional, an actual knock. Doors swing open, not by invitation, but by federal warrant. The FBI floods his world. The temple is quiet, but the business is under siege. Files taken, computers cloned, lives frozen mid-breath. This is not a metaphor for losing control. It is the physical, legal, and spiritual obliteration of every system Singer helped create. You don't get to ask why. You don't get to protest. You stand there and feel the sharp teeth of power clamp down. And even then, somehow he doesn't panic. He watches. Not like a victim, but like a monk on the edge of a volcano. Not because he's detached, but because he knows that resisting reality never stops its flow. It only exhausts you before the current even starts pulling. This is the moment the experiment goes full scale. Can you surrender when your life is being dismantled in real time? Then come the lawyers. Not one, not three. Teams of them. They speak a language made of fear and precision, and they want to fight. That's what they know. That's what they sell. But Singer doesn't want a war. He wants truth. He wants integrity. He wants to walk through this fire without becoming a flame himself. And that's not how legal systems are built. They're built on angles, strategies, leverage. So he stands in rooms full of experts and keeps breathing, keeps listening, not to their panic, but to the silent presence that carried him this far. He doesn't shrink from the process. He meets it with full engagement but zero identity. No narrative of victimhood. No posture of defense. Just, here we are. What's next? The attorneys don't understand it, but they follow it. Because deep down, even legal minds recognize when someone isn't bluffing peace. And then the government names him. In capital letters, United States of America against Michael Singer. That sentence alone can undo a person. It sounds like myth, like absurdity. How could one quiet man become the opponent of an entire nation? But that's how the structure works. When systems clash, they need someone to carry the blame. And the more visible you are, the easier you are to target. Singer doesn't flinch, not because it doesn't hurt, but because he already let go of needing anything from reputation. His surrender isn't circumstantial. It's structural. He's already dead to the ego that needs to be seen as innocent. So he cooperates. He answers. He shows up. And he trusts that truth has its own velocity, even when buried under headlines and legalese. Being charged is not the end. It's the next doorway. But surrender doesn't mean passivity. This isn't a story of sitting on cushions while the world burns. This is strategy. Real, sharp, legal thought, executed without resistance. Singer prepares a defense, not out of fear, but out of service. Service to truth, to the people affected, to the clarity that demands everything be brought into the light. He reads the documents. He cross-checks timelines. He becomes a scholar of the case without losing himself in it. That's the razor's edge, to move with full effort, full intelligence without gripping the outcome. Most people either fight or collapse. He does neither. He engages without attachment. That's what makes him untouchable. Because his center is not in the verdict, it's in the moment. Somewhere in the middle of the case, he starts reading the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, not as politics, as scripture. He sees in those documents the same thing he found in Zen and silence, the architecture of protection for what is sacred. Not sacred as in religious, sacred as in human, the right to not be presumed guilty, the right to speak, to be heard, to face your accuser. These aren't dry rights, they are spiritual tools encoded into civic law. And for the first time, he sees how even the system that is trying to break him also contains the tools to protect him. The structure is not the enemy, misuse is. And so he begins to use the system from within, not to fight, but to illuminate. The courtroom becomes a dojo, each motion a practice in truth. And then, when it all seems like it might cave in, something shifts, not dramatically, not in a flash of divine rescue, a quiet piece of evidence, a timeline, a buried document, something simple and overlooked but clear, the kind of clarity that realigns the whole picture. Slowly, the case begins to fall apart, the charges lose air, the narrative breaks, people change their tone, and Singer doesn't gloat, doesn't tighten, he just breathes. Because the win isn't the absence of punishment, the win is that he stayed aligned the entire way. This is what divine intervention really looks like, not lightning bolts, but truth arriving right on time, through means no human could orchestrate. Grace wears paper, not robes. And in the end, he walks back to where it all began, the land, the temple, the silence that first whispered surrender all those years ago. Everything had been given, everything had been taken, and here he was, unchanged, not untouched, but unshaken at the core. Because the surrender was never about escaping life. It was about meeting it with open hands. Through success, expansion, accusation, and fire, the practice held. He had become a man with nothing to defend. And because of that, everything that came and went could do so without stealing him. The last experiment was the greatest one. To watch everything burn and realize the one thing you've built, clarity, can never be destroyed. Thanks for walking this path with me. However you found this story, I hope you carry something from it into your own strange unfolding. Stay sharp, stay open, and when life starts speaking, listen.